Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live stream on managing panic attacks. Hi, if you're watching us live, and hi, if you are watching us back later. You are really welcome here. My name is Jenny F. You can see Jenny C up above me. I'm a psychotherapist, and I help manage a project called Illumina, which supports young people who are struggling with self-harm. And we also do some work for Headstrong, which is the mental health support wing of Youthscape. And we're excited to be here with you tonight.
Hello, I'm Jenny C, and I'm almost a psychotherapist. I graduate quite soon, which is very exciting. And we are so glad to have you here joining in as we're thinking about the area of panic attacks. And this might be something that you're joining in with because you want to support somebody else around you, or it might be something that is going on for you at the moment. But we really hope that you can share some questions that you have, and we're able to talk about this with you in a way that is really helpful, and you go away feeling like you understand a little bit more as well. Jenny, do you want to tell us about any of the other things that people might want to watch if this is the first time they've kind of come across us?
Yeah, so we've got a number of other live streams that we've been doing in the last few months. We've done, we do some for young people, and we do some for adults working with young people. So we've done one around how to manage exam stress. So if that's something you're already thinking of, you might want to look back at that one. We did one over the summer about what it means to think about living with scars. And what our relationship might be with our body, and over the summer, that kind of thing. We've done some stuff for grown-ups about how to support someone who's struggling with self-harm specifically. What else have we done, Jen? Am I forgetting any?
Yeah, we've recently been talking about trauma. So we've done
There's a
training
big
for
topic.
adults. And if you're kind of going, I've got mocks going on at the moment, or any exams coming up, then you might want to go way back to when we thought about exam stress and look at that. It isn't just about GCSEs or anything. It can be any exams that's going on for you.
Yeah, and we've got one coming up soon as well in a couple of weeks, which is about managing anger if anger feels something that's out of control for you. So you can tune into that one as well.
But today we are thinking all about panic attacks. And panic attacks might be something that you talk about all the time, or it might be something that you go, I know this happens to me, or I know this happens to somebody who's important to me, but I just have no idea why it's going on, what it is that's happening. I don't know how to stop it. And it can be really worrying, and it can be almost that we have anxiety about the panic attacks. And you may also be somebody who has been taught a whole load of strategies around how it is that you manage panic attacks. And you kind of go, I know all these things, but I just don't really understand why they're happening, or how to stop them, or what it is that is going on. So, and we always think it's much, much more important to talk about what it is that's going on that's stressing us out. And that's because actually, as soon as we put language around the feelings that we have, it makes our feelings feel less extreme. And you may have some really strong feelings and emotions around panic attacks. So our hope is that by talking about it, it opens up space for you to talk with other people around you, to get some extra help from people who might be supporting you at the moment, and especially also to understand yourself more. But we'd love any questions or comments. We might ask for kind of things that you know and you understand about ways of coping with them as well. So feel free to share any of those kind of things as well. And we'd love that too.
Great. So maybe 3 of the big reasons why we want to talk to you, young people, about panic attacks are here on the slide. So number 1, they can be really frightening. And I guess there's lots about a panic attack that can be frightening. The actual experience itself, especially maybe the first time that you have a panic attack, if that's something you experience, can genuinely feel absolutely terrifying. People describe feeling like they're actually dying, or they're having a heart attack, or they just cannot make sense of what is physically happening to them, and how something has kind of physically taken over them. They might be feeling like they can't even breathe. So physically they can feel like absolutely terrifying. And then even if there's something which you've had before, so they're not a completely unknown thing, you maybe have discovered, okay, this is a panic attack that I have sometimes, they can feel really unpredictable. And that can feel really scary because we don't know if we're going to get them at school. We don't know if we're going to get them when we're on the bus. We don't know if we're going to get them when we're at home or on our own, or if we're going to be in like a really sociable place. That can feel really scary because we might feel more able to manage them or cope with them in some of those settings. And maybe if we feel completely alone, that might feel terrifying. But then there are other kind of implications if other people are around us and we're scared of being judged, or other people can respond in a really unhelpful way. So it can feel really unpredictable and really disruptive. It can feel often, if it happens like in a class, that it draws a lot of attention to you, which a lot of us don't like. And can feel like an extra thing, as well as dealing with the panic attack. You're having to deal with suddenly the fact that like everybody's looking at you, or everyone's wondering what's going on, or everyone's making comments, and that just kind of escalates things in a whole different area. And then there's just the kind of self-consciousness of, do other people understand what's going on? What are they thinking? How are they describing it? How are they interpreting it? So all of that can just make them feel frightening on a number of different levels. Another reason we want to talk about it is because, to be honest, they can happen to anyone. It's not just like one type of person or one type of issue that can set off a panic attack. Having one panic attack doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to keep getting them. So it's not a case of you've had one, so better you watch out because they're all coming, they're going to become a regular feature of your life. Some people just have one or occasional panic attacks. Some people do experience them more regularly for a while, maybe even for a long time. And hopefully that means that there's lots of people who can relate to what we're going through, because all kinds of people have been through them and experienced. All kinds of people have worked out how to deal with them or manage them or make sense of them. So there is support out there that can help you make sense of it and can help you find a way through, no matter who you are and what it is you think is your story, and then maybe the reasons behind your panic attacks. And then I guess the other thing to say at the beginning, which was important, is that they're not as serious as they feel. So like I said, when you first have one, especially if you have a really very physical reaction, they can genuinely feel life-threatening. But that's actually not what's happening. Our lives are not in danger to that degree. What's happening when we have a panic attack is that some part of our brain is recognizing a risk. Now, that might be something specific that's going on right now, and we're going to talk a little bit more about triggers and what leads to panic attacks. But to kind of give you an overview, some part of our brain has recognized something that feels threatening, and it's set off like a very instinctive kind of survival instinct in us, which is kind of overriding everything else that's going on in our bodies and brains, and saying we just need to survive this. And it's kind of flooding our system with adrenaline and almost paralyzing us from doing other things. So at some level, our brain thinks it is under serious threat, but it's not. Our lives are not in danger. And when we can learn to make a bit more sense of them, recognize the symptoms, work out what can help to bring them down, then they can come to feel like much more manageable experiences, and we can find our way through.
So we're going to be talking now about what is a panic attack, what happens, and then we're going to be thinking, as Jenny said, around our triggers, but then also what we can do to help ourselves, or what it is that we can do to help somebody else. So I can see we've had questions coming in around how we can support somebody sort of in school or wherever it is that they are if they're having a panic attack. So we're going to be thinking about what it is that we can do in those moments. But one of the most straightforward ways of thinking about it is a panic attack is a feeling of sudden or really intense anxiety. And you might recognize it as I'm anxious in this space, or you might recognize it as sometimes I feel anxious in this place, or something about this place reminds me of a time I felt anxious in the past. And you can kind of peg that anxious feeling onto this is to do with this place. Sometimes it might be that a panic attack is in response to a feeling, or in the way it is that you feel when you're around a certain person, or around some comments or something like that that somebody has made. And it could also be that there are other things going on that are causing you to feel really anxious or to feel some really big emotions that feel unmanageable in that moment. And it's a little bit like your brain's kind of going, there's too much going on here. There must be some danger. And it's responding as if there is some danger in that very moment. So for a lot of people, panic attacks can have very physical symptoms. It can feel just very anxious, very worried about what's going on, but to the point of sort of shaking or feeling like, I don't quite know what's going on in this place. You feel very disorientated. And often people will say it feels like their heart is racing, they become very breathless and go very dizzy, might feel very sick, very nauseous. And so many of these kind of symptoms that happen are our body's way of preparing us to get away from something that's dangerous. But it's almost like it's gone into an overdrive and it's sort of lost perspective of whether the situation is as dangerous as our brain is telling us it is. So I remember a really long time ago being somewhere and getting some bad news while I was there. And every time I went back to that place, I would remember. So it would be a bit like my body was remembering the feelings I had in that place. And it would cause me to go, well, I know bad news happened in this place before. What if it happens again? And so I would become very anxious, or I would have a panic attack in that place because it reminded me of what had happened before. And sometimes for other people, it will be things like getting on an aeroplane, because once there was some turbulence and they didn't like the turbulence. And so that then led to a time of panic and panic attacks in the aeroplane. And other people might just have one or two, or for other people, it might be a certain trigger that they can identify, which we're going to be able to think about in a moment. And for lots of people, panic attacks are really different. So just because you know somebody who has panic attacks that look like one thing, it might be really different for you. Or if you're supporting young people, it might be really different for them. But especially that first kind of time of feeling really anxious, or the first couple of occasions of feeling a panic attack, can be really frightening. Because for the first time, it feels like my heart is beating faster than it should do, and I'm feeling really not okay, but I'm feeling a bit out of my body. And so when we think a bit about how it is that we can support somebody, we're going to be really thinking around, well, what can we do to make sure that we feel safe in those moments? And for some people, a panic attack might last a few minutes. For some people, it might last kind of up to about half an hour of that time of feeling sort of, okay, I'm feeling back how I was beforehand. And that's really normal. And it might be that some people go, actually, I know this happens to me, and I know some tools it is that I can use, but I need you to help me. And so you may also want to ask somebody afterwards, has this happened before? And what kind of things help you? So we'll be thinking around specifically some different things that we can do to help. But one of the first things that we can do is recognizing what the triggers are and recognizing what it is that's causing the panic attacks for us.
Yeah. So how do we start to recognize what triggers a panic attack? Now, for some of us, we might think, I know exactly what it is. You know, it's not a mystery for me. I know exactly what sets off a panic attack for me. But for some of us, it can feel like a kind of mystery. Like, you know, we look at the circumstances, we look at what was happening in the room, and we think, there wasn't anything. Literally, it came from nowhere. It completely blindsided me. There was no explanation. There was nothing that I was reacting to. And that can feel really scary to think, you know, there's not even a logic to them. There's not even a reason. But the things that are set off in us when we have a panic attack are, you know, our kind of physical biological systems, and they don't just set off spontaneously. So there is something happening that our body, our brain is reacting to. And like Jenny was just describing, like it could be something that doesn't feel super logical, like I'm in this place, it's just a fine place. Yes, I got some bad news here, like you know, when I was here at another time, but that doesn't mean I'm, you know, on a rational level, doesn't mean I'm going to get bad news. But there's some kind of connection that our brain is making that is setting it off. And, you know, we might kind of step back and go, well, what even is a trigger? Like, how do we understand triggers? And I think maybe the best way to understand triggers is that triggers are just connections. You know, we use the word trigger so much now, always talking about things that trigger me, or things that trigger you or trigger them, or having a trigger warning. A trigger is a connection. It is just a connection between something that happens. It might be something you say, it might be something, a memory that suddenly comes over you. It might be something someone else says, or the fact that you're in a certain place. But something about that, which in itself might not seem very threatening, connects with something in our brain which feels painful or difficult or scary. And that might be that it connects with something that happened a long time ago. It might connect in a slightly strange way that can be a little bit hard to like figure out, and you kind of end up having to be something of a detective to like work out what is it that happened then that connected with something. But I think thinking of triggers as connections can be really helpful, because it's not like there's something innately awful in the trigger. It's just that there was something that happened that connected to something in you which set off this reaction. Something that felt terrifying, something that felt threatening, something that caused your body to feel, we need to, press into action. We need to do something in order to survive. And at that level, when your body's operating at that kind of survival level, it really is kind of, in lots of ways, very unsophisticated. It's just about, we need to do something to survive. So thinking back about what has happened just before, I'm not suggesting we do this at the time. This is the kind of thing that we're doing after a panic attack has finished, and we're trying to look back and to make sense of it. It's really helpful to think what was happening just before. What was being said, spoken about? What was I thinking about? What was going on in the room? Do I have any memories about that room? Were there particular smells? Were there particular, things that I was thinking about? Make yourself into that kind of detective who's going to try and find the clues in that story. And sometimes that can take time. And I guess another important thing to say about triggers is that sometimes it can be as clear as like someone said this and it, connected with this thing and it just set off this panic attack. But sometimes it can also be to do with the fact that things have been building up, that there are things that generally in our lives that we are anxious about, that we are stressed about. It might be to do with school. It might be to do with what's going on at home. Whatever the reason is, if those things are there and they're building, and if we're not really talking about them and we're not really getting support or help for them and not really kind of, I guess, processing them, but trying to ignore them or just kind of survive them, then when those things build up, they can then leave us very vulnerable to like a little thing will just push us over the edge into the panic attack. And, the story of the trigger is as much about everything that's been building up and everything that we've already been carrying around inside of us, as it is about maybe the little thing that then does that final connection and that final push over the edge.
So how do we manage in that moment? Wow. It's quite a big question, isn't it? Because it can be so common for us to feel afraid of when's it going to happen again, or what's going on for me in this moment. But the very first thing that it's so important to do is to not fear the panic attack. Now, nobody has had a panic attack for all of their lives. It is something that always passes. And in a way, although it might not feel like it at the time, the symptoms in themselves aren't harmful. So the fact that we might feel like our heart is beating more than it does usually, or we've gone very breathless, or hands have gone sweaty, or anything like this, those things, although they feel really distressing, they're not harmful for us. And so it can be so important to begin by reminding ourselves of, I'm having this response because of something that's caused me to be anxious. And it's normal to feel anxious. And you might not be able to remind yourself of that at the time. You might need somebody around you to be reminding you of that. But you might also want to say that to yourself afterwards, of it's really normal to feel anxious about things. And this is my body's way of responding to something that is causing me to feel anxious in this moment. Sometimes if we notice that we feel like a panic attack's coming on, we can then go, I've got to distract myself. When actually that doesn't help. Because if we distract ourselves in that moment, the level of anxiety that our body is saying is going on is still there. And then we can then start going, oh, I don't know what to do because I can feel this coming, but I feel like now is the right time. Instead, one of the most brilliant ways is to go, I'm just going to ride this out. I know at this moment, this is what's going to happen, and I'm just going to ride it out. So if possible, trying to remain in that moment of going, okay, this is what's happening for me, and I know that it's going to be okay. Right now, this is horrific. It feels really bad, but it's not going to last. We can also do things like go, okay, all right, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm just going to go to a place that is safe for me. And it might be that means staying where you are, or it might be kind of stepping outside of the room, any of those kind of things. But especially that sort of depends on what's happening for you in that moment and where things are. And you might also want to afterwards be thinking, okay, that happened, and now I need to kind of ground myself. And grounding yourself is that way of recognizing when I'm having a panic attack, I lose sense of where I am in the world, and I lose sense of a connection with my body. And that's a really normal experience for any of us to have when we're feeling particularly anxious. But we can do lots of different grounding exercises. So one thing is something like listing 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you taste. And that brings you back into connection with what's happening for you in your body in that moment. It doesn't matter what order you do them in, but don't start with trying to list 5 things you can taste, because that's really hard to do. Give yourself like a bit of an easy one at the moment. Begin with 5 things you can see. You might also want to just name the colours around you. The walls are white, my jumper's green, the floor is grey, the sky is blue, and just name, okay, this is where I am right now. You might want to also reassure yourself with, I am safe right now. I know that I'm safe because I'm in my geography classroom and it's Sarah that's sitting next to me, it's Stephen that's sitting the other side of me. I know that I'm okay. I know that these people are okay. So grounding exercises are about bringing us back into the moment. One of the other things also that's really helpful is to find somebody to breathe with us. And that helps us slow down our breathing. Because one of the most frightening things that happens during a panic attack is that our breathing becomes much quicker, or we feel very breathless. And that then becomes frightening because we can't imagine in that moment that our breathing will become more normal. And we'll go back to kind of how we're used to our breathing being, because most of us, we never really even think about our breathing. And then as soon as you start thinking about your breathing, you start panicking, am I breathing normally? And all those kind of things. So having somebody with us who we can borrow their breathing is really, really helpful. So having someone who slows down their breathing so that we can breathe with them, or helps us count our breathing. So there's lots of things about doing a circle or a square or a triangle, and we trace up one side of this imaginary shape of a breathing in, and then holding your breath, and then breathing out. I always think a triangle is quite good, but you can do whatever shape it is that comes and fits in that moment. But doing something that is really concentrating on your breathing and doing as much as possible to slow it down can be really helpful. And because that can be really hard to do by yourself, we always really recommend that you can do that with somebody. And if you're supporting somebody who's having a panic attack, helping them breathe in those moments can be really good. It's the kind of thing also when you try and breathe with somebody else, you often get the giggles. And so that's almost a bit of a grounding in itself, because it's beginning to take you out of such a strong, intense emotion of the panic attack and bringing you into that grounded space there.
Mm.
Sometimes people find it really helpful also to kind of hum along to music, those kind of things as well. Because in the humming, we're then thinking about our breathing differently. And we're not focused in that moment on the panic attack or on the situation that caused it to happen, on the trigger. We're then focusing on the breathing or the song that we're humming, any of those kind of things. So it might be really helpful to think of, okay, what music do I need to remember that's easy for me to hum to or kind of murmur along to in those moments? That might be really helpful for you. Lots of people also find it really good to be able to do things that mean that they're squeezing parts of their bodies. So kind of squeezing their hands, squeezing their feet, squeezing the muscles in their legs. And that can really help you have a bit more control over what's happening in your body. Because panic attack can then take you in a feeling like I'm not quite in my body, I'm not quite here. And so those things then help us to get the blood pumping all around our bodies, to help remind us we're safe in this moment, and helps us connect with ourselves. And Chris has asked about kind of breathing into a paper bag. And that's something that I think often we see shown on TV and in films quite a bit as like, okay, this is a really helpful thing, breathing in. And it's because in that moment of breathing like that, we're focusing on our breathing and we're focusing on taking good breaths. And there's something really visual about a paper bag because as you blow into it, you see it getting bigger. And as you breathe out, you see it getting smaller, and it helps remind you of going, oh, yeah, actually, my breathing is okay. I can see that I'm breathing. But unless like I'm in Tesco's, I don't really have an easy access to paper bags. I don't carry them around with me. And I
Do they
remind
have paper bags in Tesco? I mean, I feel like I haven't seen
I
them.
feel like they do for mushrooms or for like
Oh,
a
okay, yeah, maybe. Yeah, fair
but
enough.
it may well be that you also, like me, don't carry paper bags around with you. And so one of the things that's helpful is to kind of put your hand in front of your mouth and go, because as you're breathing in and out, you can feel it on your hand. You
Mm.
can do it kind of like with a bit of tissue or something like this. But something that's physical as well, that then shows you that, okay, I can see that I'm slowing down my breathing because I can see the impact of that on the tissue. Again, it grounds you because it takes you out of the moment of the panic attack and then brings you back into, okay, all right, I can begin to slow things down.
Mm.
And it doesn't always last that long. It's something that will be different each time and different for each person as well. And after a panic attack, a lot of people say, like, I am exhausted. I need just a bit more time to calm down and to feel ready to think about what triggered it, or to think about returning to that lesson or returning to that place or kind of talking to that person again. And that's really normal as well. And so you might want to think, all right, I know after this happens, I need to go and have something warm to drink, or I need to go and talk with somebody around me about what it is that's going on for me. And so if you're supporting somebody who's having a panic attack, then that might also be something that you want to talk about with them. What do you
Mm.
need to do now? What do you need as the thing that's going to help you?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea, of having somebody else to breathe with. The fancy word for that, for part of what's happening there, is co-regulation, where somebody else is helping you to kind of bring you back to that kind of neutral place, to that okay place. And it's such a good thing that you can do in school, because I feel like I work with quite a lot of teenagers who talk about, what do I do when I get a panic attack in class? How do I manage that? And often their friends are going, what can I do? How can I help? But how amazing to have a friend who you're going to be sitting next to, who you can give a kind of little sign to if you're starting to struggle, and they can just kind of really just get you breathing with them. It's such a kind of unflashy but like a really helpful way, like really practical way to help them. Like, when that happens to you, we'll just breathe together. And I guess the other thing about the breathing thing is that you need to do it for longer than you think. And we always think, okay, fine, I'll breathe. And then we do take 5 breaths and we're like, that hasn't helped. But we really need to do it for like a few minutes for it to really start to have like a physical effect on us and really kind of bring us back into a different place. So, and I love the grounding techniques as well. One of the things I always do to ground myself is just wiggle my toes when I feel like I'm struggling and not really feeling present, or this is a silly one, I try and remind myself of the date, because generally it takes a little bit of effort to remember what date it is. Like today is Tuesday the 18th of October 2022, and just kind of the effort of having to remember what day and date and month it is kind of slightly brings me back into into now as well. So yeah, great ideas. So I'm slightly drawn by this question that's come up on the side as well. Like, do you grow out of panic attacks? That's an interesting question, isn't it? So and I don't think it's a yes or no answer. There's lots that's going on in our brains, as you might have heard us speak about on other webinars. It's, you know, in adolescence, which is really up to the age of 25, there's loads of ways in which our brains are still changing and growing and, you know, transitioning us from childhood to adulthood with all the kind of new skills that we need. That means that our emotional experience in those years is more intense than it is likely to be beyond that point. So, you know, there's a dimension, therefore, of adolescence that means we're probably more likely to experience panic attacks in that time because, because of the ways our brains are growing and changing, because of that it's harder for us to make sense of emotions. We haven't grown all the skills that we'll need to manage and cope with them and to work out what to do with them. So I think there are some big reasons why panic attacks are often more of a challenge in adolescence than they might be. But that doesn't mean they necessarily go away. And we obviously know that adults do experience panic attacks as well. So yeah, I think it's a kind of yes and no. There's that there's particular reasons why we might get more of them in adolescence, but it's not a given that they'll just disappear. You know, what helps us get through them isn't just growing up, but it's also doing the work of, you know, trying to make sense of them a bit, looking for other coping skills, that kind of thing as well. What would you say, Jem?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think sometimes we can feel, oh, people only start getting panic attacks when they're teenagers. Whereas actually, there are many adults that say, I never had a panic attack before. And then suddenly something happens and then it began for me as well. And so it might also be they have to spend some time learning different skills and managing things. It doesn't always have to be something that impacts us. We may also be here because we know we're adults and we're having panic attacks and we're not sure how to do that, or whether it's something that we should tell people about or not. Because I think there's often some stigma around, well, we're adults and we must have everything sorted. Whereas you may well be kind of going, yeah, actually, I'm a youth worker and I know that this is impacting me too. And so lots of the tips and the strategies and the ideas that we've suggested are things that you can use regardless of the age that you are. And if you're supporting somebody also, you can use the same things, whether you're supporting somebody who is 15 or they're 55. They are all things that we can do to bring ourselves back into ourselves as well and to manage panic attacks.
And sometimes, you know, I guess relating back to our last live stream that we did about trauma, sometimes panic attacks can begin to affect us after we've experienced something particularly traumatic. They might be set off by a particular event or a particular experience, which raises our anxiety levels for many reasons. And so that's another reason why they might set in at a particular point, which might be in adolescence and it might be in adulthood. But there might be a connection there to be made as well. So I guess there's a much bigger picture and a much bigger story than just something which is about adolescence. Okay, so recognizing when we can handle something. So there'll be times when we become aware that we are struggling. There'll be times when we maybe sense a panic attack coming or fear that a panic attack is coming. And hopefully, the more familiar we become, I guess, with some of the things we've been speaking about and doing some of the thinking about triggers and understanding where they come from, the more understanding we might have about what it is that we're anxious about, what it is that maybe we're remembering. Often, as Jen said earlier, something will happen which will actually kind of take us back to another situation, which is what's causing the anxiety, the situation that happened before that was perhaps really scary or really difficult, rather than maybe what is actually happening in the room. And so there's some thinking that we can do that can help, that can support us as we, I guess, are becoming aware of feeling anxious, working out. So this is a great thermometer. which I guess helps us paint the picture that not everything feels the same. Not every like glimmer of anxiety feels the same. Like, so if we look really low down on the thermometer like this, that might be a particularly low level of anxiety that might make life feel great and like very manageable and like, you know, I can do this. I like feeling this calm. This is okay. I can manage this. And then there's that pink area in the middle where things start to feel challenging, maybe. But it's not the same as the things which maybe set us into a place of crisis. And part of the challenge that we have is being able to recognize what is happening right now. Is the situation that I'm in, or that feels like is developing, is that something which I can manage? It might make me feel anxious. It might make me feel uncomfortable. It might make me remember something difficult, but the situation itself is something that I know I can cope with, something that I've survived before, and that I can manage, even if it isn't that fun. Or is this sending me into a place where I don't feel like I can cope? I feel physically at threat. I don't feel like I can stay in the room. And part of the journey to managing our anxiety and managing even our panic attacks is learning to work out where we are on that scale, rather than a kind of black and white of I'm fine or I'm in crisis, I'm in panic attack mode. Working out like what the other stages are and which are the ones which we have actually kind of learnt how to manage and how to deal with. And over time, those things will probably shift as well. Like it might feel like at the moment, there's quite a low level anxiety you can manage, and then it starts to feel really scary and threatening. But as you know, try out some of the practical things we've been talking about, do some of the work of trying to understand why you're anxious, what you're fearing, what's making you feel panicked, then those lines shift, and actually we find that there's more that we can sit out, there's more that we can manage, there's more that we can cope with before we get to a point of feeling overwhelmed and overcome, and like those physical reactions are really overwhelming us. So anything more you would say about this?
Yeah, this reminds me of how hot it was over the summer.
Yeah, yeah.
You know how when we're like, oh my goodness, this is like the hottest I've ever been in life. And you might have felt right at the beginning, oh, I quite like this. Quite like the fact that it's really sunny. And then you remembered something that you had to do. And then you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I have to do that thing while it is really, really hot. This is a crisis. I have to avoid that thing. I have to stay in a place of just liking things. But I would imagine that you probably had some really good tools to manage the heat. So you would have gone, I probably don't need to wear a jumper. It's a bit too hot. I probably can handle this if I drink more water and if I eat more ice cream, those kind of things. So we will all naturally have ways that we go to of, I can handle this. And when we're talking about the weather, we can probably think of them really quickly. We don't always go as far as this is a crisis when we're thinking about the weather. But you may need to kind of put those thoughts into other situations. So if you've got exams going on, you might be like, I hate exams, therefore it's a crisis. But you might also be able to think of it as actually, if I am able to revise beforehand, speak to people at school around what help I need with these exams, I don't like it, but I can handle it. Just like I had to handle stuff over the summer when the weather was so hot, I thought I couldn't manage. And I got through it. Just like that, there will be things I can handle now.
So how can we get the support that we need when we're struggling? So I guess the first context I'm thinking about is school, because that is often an environment which many of us find stressful and anxiety inducing. It's where obviously loads of us spend loads of time as teenagers. And it can also feel one of the most difficult places to kind of contemplate having a panic attack. So how do we get support? Well, I guess there's two levels. One is I'm thinking about like immediate support. You know, if you have had a panic attack, if you know that this is something that happens sometimes in school, think for yourself about what helps you, because it's not the same for all of us. Some of us might want to just be left alone. Some of us might need somebody with us. Somebody might need someone breathing with us. Somebody might need to just be able to go to the toilet for 5 minutes, and then they come back and they feel all right as long as they have that space on their own. Some of us might need to go and cry. Some of us might need to go and have a hot drink. Some of those are more manageable, of course, in school. But it's really important to ask the question of yourself, like, what do I need in that moment? Like, what helps me? What genuinely helps get me through? Is it a safe person? Is it not being with anyone? And then think about, who can I talk to in school about that? Is there, who feels like a safe member of staff to do that? Is it a kind of a counsellor that you see in school? Is it a pastoral staff member? Is it your form tutor who you have a good relationship, your head of year? There's no like right person. It's the person that you feel like will understand and will support you. And talk to them and say, I sometimes have panic attacks. These are the kinds of circumstances that set me off, if you know that. And when they happen, this is what helps me feel okay. Can you help me work out how to navigate that in school? And especially, you might also want to say, because the thing that like makes it worse and makes me feel, just doesn't help. It's like the opposite of helpful is this or this or this, because probably many of us have had the experience of just feeling like the worst possible response. So if you can say to that, these are the things that are least helpful, then, an understanding teacher will want to say, okay, let's think about then how we can support you and how we can make sure that you're going to be okay, because everyone's interested in getting you back to okay and getting you to a place where you can learn again, where you can kind of be in school. So yeah, talking to them about what you need and what helps and what doesn't help you, really important. Communication. And then in the bigger picture, I guess this work that you do around, what are the situations that I know set me off? Is it worse if I've been getting stressed about things and not talking to someone? So could I maybe make a point of trying to talk to someone, maybe again, a kind of pastoral person in school, about some of those stressful things so that they don't build up in the same way? What are the other things that I can do so that I don't feel so stressed in school? Can I make sure that I'm getting enough sleep and that I'm eating all right, that I'm getting to do fun things that mean that I don't become overwhelmed with stress really easily, because I'm actually looking after myself? So those are also ways that we can support ourselves, like in the bigger picture. Do you have any other top tips, Jen? Because I know that you've got a bit more experience than me of actually working in a school.
Yeah, I think it's about finding out all the options that are available. So this is the same if you're supporting somebody else as well. There will be different things that are needed at different times. Some schools will have a timeout card, those kind of things. So it's around going, well, what is available? And if you are the person in charge in the school, or you're able to kind of have a say in this, what are you able to offer? One of the best things, I think, is having some kind of a sheet that says, actually, for me, this is what a panic attack looks like, and this is what I need, this is where I need to go, and these are the strategies that are needed to help me. And that can be something really little that you have with you, but it might also be something that you find really helpful to share with members of staff or in certain people that you trust. But I can see also that Julian's asked around kind of, how do we help ourselves to heal from things in the past? So it might be that you also want to speak to people at school around, what other support is available for me? Can you help signpost me to counsellors or therapists or people who can help me manage the things that have happened that are coming up that are triggering me now? So make the most of all the support that's available. And if what you need isn't available, it's really okay to say, please, can we find a way of me being able to access this kind of stuff? Lots of people have apps or fidget toys or things like that as well that can help them in those moments. And often those things aren't allowed in school. And so it might be that you want to kind of have a conversation of, where can I go that's a nice, quiet, safe space for me where I can use those things too. So if you're supporting somebody in a school, you might want to agree where they can get some extra support from, either speaking with somebody else around things that have happened, or also around finding somewhere really quiet where they can get that support from too. And I'm aware that we're coming up to an end, because there's a lot that can be covered in these kind of things. But we really hope that this has been helpful as a way of being able to think around what is happening when someone's having a panic attack and what support it is that they can access, how you can support them. And I hope that you feel like you understand more about panic attacks. So thank you for coming and joining with us this evening. And we'll be having another YouTube Live. Jenny, do you want to tell us about the next one that we're going to be having and when that's occurring?
Sure, we're going to be live again on the 1st of November, and we're going to be talking about how do we manage anger when it feels out of control. That's something that can be a real challenge, especially in teenage years. So we're going to be thinking about what that means for us as young people struggling with our anger, but also maybe about how we can support someone who's really struggling with that anger as well. Is it something we can control?
Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening. Take care.
Good night.
Bye.